The bank was crowded with restless customers when William, 65, stepped to the counter. His voice was soft, his words simple, yet every sentence drew chuckles from the staff. A teller mimicked his tone, and the crowd laughed louder. Phones came out, recording his humiliation. William's hands shook, but behind his humble silence lay a truth no one expected, the moment that would soon force even the bank director to salute him. If people laughed at your simplicity, if you're humble, tone became the reason for your humiliation. What would you do? Would you fight back or walk away in silence? Tell me in the comments. Also, let me know which city and country you're watching from, so I can thank you personally. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon for more true stories like this. William was 65, but his eyes carried the weight of decades far heavier than his age. His shoulders were slightly stooped, not from weakness, but from years of quiet labor. He had never lived a life of luxury. Instead, his story was written in long nights, calloused hands, and sacrifices that few had ever noticed. Born in a small rural town, William had grown up with values that were simple yet unshakable: honesty, humility, and service to others. His father had been a factory worker, his mother a seamstress. They never had much money, but what they lacked in wealth, they gave in love. From them, William inherited not only a strong back, but also a strong heart. When he was young, William dreamed of becoming a teacher. He wanted to shape young minds, to help children from poor families like his own find a better future. But life rarely bends to dreams. His father fell ill when William was just 17, and the family needed someone to provide. So William left school and found work, first at a warehouse, then at a construction site, later as a janitor. He did whatever was needed, never once complaining. Marriage came in his late 20s. His wife, Margaret, was the one bright flame in his otherwise difficult life. Together, they raised a daughter, Emily, who grew up watching her father work 2, sometimes 3 jobs to keep food on the table. William never bought himself new clothes, never wasted money on luxuries. Every penny was either spent on family or saved carefully at the bank, his safety net for emergencies. But fate can be cruel. Margaret passed away from illness when Emily was only 15. William became both father and mother, protector and provider. His eyes often welled with tears late at night, but he never let Emily see. Instead, he gave her every ounce of strength he had left. Years later, Emily married and started her own family. William's joy multiplied when his granddaughter, Lily, was born. She was the light of his old age, the little girl who would climb onto his lap and call him Grandpa Will. For her, he saved every extra dollar. Every month he visited the bank, depositing his modest earnings into the account that he now stood defending. But Lily's health had taken a dark turn. A rare illness required expensive medicine and treatments. William's modest savings were all that stood between her and worsening pain. That was why he had come to the bank that morning. Not for himself, not for luxury, but for the life of the little girl who was his entire world. Yet instead of compassion, he was met with laughter. Instead of understanding, with mockery. The very money he had saved so carefully, the very account he had trusted for years, was now being guarded by people who couldn't see beyond his simplicity. William's trembling hands rested on the counter as he tried to remain calm. He wasn't ashamed of his tone. His voice carried the echo of farm fields, of factory floors, of all the places he had labored without complaint. He wasn't ashamed of his simplicity either. For him, simplicity was not weakness. It was dignity. But those around him could not see it. Not yet. The bank's lobby had become a stage, and William the unwilling actor in a cruel performance. His trembling hands still rested on the glass counter, his documents neatly placed before the teller. But the laughter around him drowned his words. "Sir," the teller said again, rolling her eyes, "if you can't speak properly, then I really can't help you. We don't have all day." Her voice was sharp, deliberately loud, and laced with mockery. The crowd chuckled. A businessman in a tailored suit muttered, "He sounds like he came straight out of the woods. What's he even doing in a place like this?" Another young man, recording on his phone, added sarcastically, "Maybe he thought this was a charity office." The cruel humor spread quickly. Customers shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. William tried again, his voice soft but steady. "Please, my account, here, many years. I only send money for my granddaughter. She is very sick." The teller leaned back in her chair, folded her arms and mimicked him in a sing-song tone. "My granddaughter. Very sick." Her imitation sent another ripple of laughter through the line. William's heart pounded. His face burned. He had lived a life of dignity, of sacrifice, of quiet endurance. Yet here he was, mocked like a child for nothing more than the way he spoke. He wanted to defend himself, but the words caught in his throat. A woman in the line whispered loudly enough for all to hear, "Honestly, people like him should learn how to talk before coming to a bank. It's embarrassing." The businessman smirked. "Maybe he's not even from here. Looks like some old fool trying to scam." Sympathy. Phones were up everywhere now, recording the spectacle. The more William struggled, the more entertainment he provided for strangers. He could already imagine the videos being uploaded with cruel captions. "Old man fails at bank," or "Grandpa can't speak English." The humiliation was suffocating. His hands trembled as he reached for the only thing that anchored him, an old wallet where he kept his most precious mementos. Inside was a small, folded piece of fabric, a fragment of a flag, carefully sewn into his coat years ago. Whenever the world mocked or rejected him, William touched it to remind himself of who he was. He pressed it now, hidden under his coat collar, whispering silently to himself, "Stay calm. For Lily. Just for Lily." But the teller wasn't finished. She waved her hand dismissively toward security. "This is wasting everyone's time. Sir, step aside. Let real customers be served." The security guard, a tall man in his 50s, began walking toward William. The crowd watched eagerly. Some already streaming live on social media. For a brief moment, William thought of simply leaving, walking away from the sneers, the laughter, the judgment, but something inside him resisted. He had endured humiliation before, but today wasn't just about him. Today was about his granddaughter's medicine. Today was about survival. So he stayed rooted where he stood, calm, quiet, humiliated yet unbroken, and it was in that moment, as the cruelty reached its peak, that a sound from the upper floor interrupted everything, the sudden, sharp crash of a coffee cup hitting marble. Heads turned, silence spread. From the director's office upstairs, footsteps echoed, fast, urgent, heavy with recognition. Someone important was coming. The sharp echo of the coffee cup crashing upstairs had frozen the entire lobby into silence. Even the cruel laughter that had filled the bank only seconds earlier dissolved into uneasy murmurs. All eyes turned toward the staircase, where the hurried thud of polished shoes grew louder and louder. The bank's director, Mr. Jonathan Hayes, rarely left his office during business hours. To see him now, storming down the stairs with urgency, his face pale and shaken, was nothing short of startling. His assistants scrambled behind him, bewildered. William stood motionless at the counter, still holding his documents, still humiliated, unaware that his life was about to change. "Sir, should we call security?" one of the assistants asked, nervously, but Hayes didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the old man by the teller's window. His steps grew quicker, his chest rising and falling as if he had just run a mile. By the time he reached the bottom floor, his expression was no longer one of confusion. It was recognition. The crowd parted instinctively, leaving a clear path between the director and William. Phones stayed raised, but now they shook in trembling. Hands! Something important was unfolding, something no one wanted to miss. Hayes stopped just a few feet away. His lips trembled as though words refused to come. He studied William's face, the lines of age, the weariness in his eyes. And then, almost in a whisper, he spoke. "William? Staff Sergeant William Carter." The teller frowned, glancing between them. "Sir, this man is just causing trouble. He doesn't even know how to—" "Silence!" Hayes snapped, his voice shaking with authority. The room went dead quiet. William's brow furrowed. He hadn't heard that name, Staff Sergeant Carter, in years. Slowly, with disbelief, he turned toward the director, his lips parted, his voice barely audible. "Lieutenant Hayes." The recognition was mutual. In an instant, the decades melted away. The marble floors of the bank vanished from their minds, replaced by the dusty battlegrounds of a foreign war. They were no longer banker and humiliated customer. They were two soldiers bound forever by sacrifice. Hayes's eyes filled with tears. Without hesitation, without caring that cameras were pointed at him, the director straightened his back, lifted his hand to his brow, and delivered a sharp, perfect military salute. The bank gasped collectively. The teller froze, her mocking smile evaporating into horror. The security guard dropped his arms and stepped back in shock. Customers who had been laughing moments ago stood rooted in shame. In the middle of a crowded bank, the most powerful man in the building saluted the one they had all mocked. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes's voice rang out, breaking the stunned silence, "you are standing in the presence of a hero. This man saved my life." Phones that had been recording mockery were now recording history. The cruel smirks turned into trembling hands covering mouths. And William, humble, quiet William, stood frozen, a mixture of disbelief and dignity washing over his tired face. For the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. For the first time in decades, his voice, his simplicity, his very existence was honored. The silence in the bank was so heavy that even the ticking of the wall clock echoed. All eyes were fixed on Director Hayes, his hand still raised in a rigid salute, his voice thick with memory and respect. "This man," Hayes declared, his words carrying across the entire lobby, "is not just another customer. He is Staff Sergeant William Carter, U.S. Army, the man who once took a bullet so I could live to stand here today." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Customers lowered their phones, their earlier smirks collapsing into shame. The businessman in the expensive suit swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the floor. The mother, who had pulled her child closer now, looked at William with tears brimming in her eyes. Melissa, the young teller who had mocked him, stood frozen, her hands trembling on the counter. Her face drained of color as the reality sank in. She had humiliated a war hero. Hayes stepped closer to William, his voice cracking. "I remember that day. Kandahar, 1992. We were ambushed. I should have died there, but you didn't hesitate. You dragged me to safety even as blood poured from your own shoulder. I owe you my life, Sergeant. And so does every man in that convoy." William's eyes welled with tears. He hadn't spoken of that day in decades, carrying his memories quietly, like the scars across his body. To him, it was just duty, something any soldier would have done. But to see it remembered now, honored publicly, was almost too much for his weary heart. He whispered hoarsely, "I only did my job, sir. Nothing more." "No," Hayes replied firmly, his voice echoing with conviction. "You did everything. You sacrificed your body, your peace, your future, for us, and yet—" He turned sharply toward the teller, his gaze burning with disappointment. "You dared to treat him as if he were less, as if his voice, his simplicity, his dignity meant nothing. Do you realize the shame of what you've done?" Melissa's lips quivered. I didn't know. I thought, that's just Hayes interrupted, his tone severe. You didn't think, you judged. The room was thick with regret. The customers who had laughed now looked away, unable to face William. Phones that had been raised to capture cruelty were quietly tucked away. The security guard straightened, saluting William with trembling respect. Then Hayes turned back to the old man, his eyes softening. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, carefully folded piece of fabric, an American flag fragment, worn but preserved. I've carried this with me for 30 years. The bandage you tore from your own uniform to stop my bleeding, it kept me alive. I promised myself that if I ever saw you again, I'd return it. He pressed the cloth into William's hands. William's fingers trembled as he held it. For years, he had kept his own piece of the flag sewn into his coat collar, a reminder of his service. Now, holding this second fragment, the one tied to the day he had saved a life, he felt whole again. Tears streamed freely down his cheeks. He lifted his hand slowly, returning the salute with all the dignity his aging body could muster. The entire lobby erupted into applause. Customers clapped with tears in their eyes. Some bowed their heads. Others whispered apologies under their breath. In one moment, the man who had been mocked as a fool became the hero everyone wished they had stood up for sooner. Melissa, unable to hold back her guilt, stepped out from behind the counter. Her eyes glistened with tears as she faced William. "Mr. Carter," she whispered, voice breaking, "I was cruel. I was blind. I failed to see the man in front of me. I am deeply sorry." William studied her face quietly. For a long moment, the room held its breath. And then, in his soft, humble tone, he said, "Kindness is always a choice. Remember that." Melissa broke down sobbing. Customers nodded in agreement. The humiliation William had suffered was now reversed, not by anger, not by revenge, but by the quiet strength of his dignity and the unexpected salute of a man whose life he had once saved. The applause still echoed across the marble walls of Northridge Bank long after William had lowered his trembling hand. What had begun as mockery had now turned into a moment of profound unity. Customers who had once snickered were now wiping their eyes. Strangers who had judged him now whispered words of apology and respect. But the change did not end in the lobby. Director Hayes, still visibly shaken by the reunion, turned to his staff. "From this day forward," he announced firmly, "Northridge Bank will honor our heroes. No veteran, no elder, no customer of dignity will ever be treated with disrespect again." He instructed his managers immediately, free wire transfers for all veterans and their families. The very first beneficiary was William's granddaughter, whose medical bills were piling up overseas. By evening, the funds had been transferred in full, paid not only by the bank, but by donations pouring in after the story spread like wildfire. News crews arrived within the hour, their cameras capturing the once crowded lobby now transformed into a place of reverence. Headlines spread across television and social media. Bank director salutes elderly veteran. Crowd humbled after learning the truth. The same phones that had mocked William earlier were now sharing his story as one of hope and redemption. Clips of Hayes' salute went viral, garnering millions of views. The hashtag #SaluteWilliam trended nationwide. Veterans groups from across the city began to gather at the bank the very next day. Men and women, young and old, some in wheelchairs, others with medals pinned to their jackets, came not for money, but to stand beside William. They formed a quiet circle of solidarity, each one recognizing in him the unspoken sacrifices of service. Frank Morrison, a Vietnam veteran who had hesitated to speak up during the humiliation, approached William with tears in his eyes. "Brother," he said simply, extending a weathered hand, "I should have stood up for you yesterday. I'm sorry." William clasped his hand firmly. "You stand up now." he replied softly. "That is what matters." The transformation rippled outward. Schools invited William to speak to their students, not about war, but about dignity, kindness, and resilience. He stood before classrooms of young faces and told them, "Voices may sound different, but kindness sounds the same in every language." Students gave him standing ovations. Teachers wept quietly at the back of the room. Melissa, the teller who had mocked him, found herself changed as well. Her public apology was raw, trembling but sincere. With Hayes's support, she left her job at the bank to work with immigrant support services, determined to help newcomers navigate life with dignity instead of scorn. The bank itself underwent permanent change. Near its entrance, Hayes commissioned a display case with William's story, his service photo, and the small piece of the American flag he carried in his coat. Below it, a plaque was placed. "Quiet honor never forgets." Within months, the policy spread across other banks nationwide. Free services for veterans, cultural training for staff, and campaigns to honor unsung heroes. What had begun with humiliation in one branch became a nationwide movement of compassion. But perhaps the most meaningful impact was personal. William's granddaughter, whose treatment was now fully funded, recovered and began studying medicine. In America, she told reporters, "I want to heal others the way my grandfather healed hearts with his sacrifice." For William, the transformation was overwhelming. The man who once felt invisible now found himself at the center of gratitude, love, and recognition. Yet true to his nature, he carried it humbly. Whenever someone called him a hero, he would smile gently and say, "I only did my duty." The real heroes are those who still choose kindness every day. Months passed, but the memory of that moment in Northridge Bank did not fade. Instead, it grew, shared, retold, and immortalized in hearts across the nation. William, once mocked for his tone and simplicity, was now celebrated as a living reminder of humility, sacrifice, and honor. 1 year later, he stood not in a bank lobby but beneath the grand dome of the National Veterans Recognition Ceremony in Washington, D.C. The auditorium was filled with thousands, veterans, families, students, leaders, and immigrants who had come seeking the American dream. The air was thick with respect as William, now dressed in a crisp suit, walked slowly to the stage. But one detail remained unchanged: the small piece of American flag sewn into the collar of his coat. His private symbol of endurance was now his public emblem of identity. The audience rose to their feet in applause as Director Hayes, now his closest friend and advocate, escorted him to the podium. William's voice, still simple, still humble, carried across the hall. "When I came to America," he began, "I thought I had to sound like everyone else to belong. I believed my simplicity, my accent, my quiet ways made me less. But I learned something different. The heart that loves this country, the heart that serves others, that heart speaks the same language everywhere." The audience fell silent, hanging on every word. "I was laughed at," William continued, his voice trembling with emotion, "but I was also saluted, and that salute reminded me, and reminded all of us, that dignity never dies. Even when the world forgets, honor remembers." At that moment, Hayes walked forward, carrying a framed display, William's original military ID alongside the faded cloth bandage he had once torn from his uniform to save Hayes's life. He handed it to William and spoke softly into the microphone. "This man saved not just me, but the meaning of honor itself. And today, America remembers." The hall erupted into thunderous applause, a standing ovation that lasted minutes. Veterans saluted, children waved flags, and families wiped away tears. From that day forward, William's story became more than a viral headline. It became a legacy. Schools used his story to teach tolerance, respect, and the dangers of prejudice. Banks nationwide adopted the Quiet Honor initiative, pledging dignity for every customer. Immigrant families shared his story with their children, reminding them that their voices mattered. His granddaughter, now thriving in medical school, carried his legacy forward by vowing to dedicate her life to healing. Even the young mother who had once recorded William's humiliation brought her children to meet him. She asked for his help in teaching them kindness. William smiled softly and said, "Children learn what we show them. Show them honor. That is enough." And so, the man once dismissed as too simple, too soft-spoken, became a voice that echoed across generations. Not for his rank, not for his medals, but for his quiet dignity that demanded the respect of a nation. In the end, William's story stood as proof. True honor doesn't shout. It stands quietly, waiting to be recognized. William's journey teaches us something powerful. A single moment of dignity can change an entire community, and a single act of respect can echo for generations. He walked into a bank as a tired, mocked old man, but he walked out as a symbol of honor, courage, and quiet strength. Now I want to ask you, have you ever seen someone judged unfairly, only for the truth to reveal their strength? What did you do in that moment? Did you speak up? Or did you stay silent, wishing later you had done more? Share your story in the comments. Your words may inspire someone else to choose kindness the next time they face such a moment. Write the word respect in the comments if you believe dignity should never depend on how someone sounds, looks, or speaks. And please, tell me which city and country you're watching from so I can personally thank you. If William's story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video to honor his sacrifice. Subscribe for more powerful true stories like this. Hit the bell so you never miss the next story of courage and humanity, because in the end, heroes don't always wear medals or uniforms. Sometimes they walk quietly among us, waiting for the world to see them for who they truly are. This was William's story, but it could be any of ours. Let's make sure no voice, no heart, and no hero is ever forgotten. Again,